All right. So we have confirmed that you guys can hear us. All is good. The chat's working.
Can everybody hear me? That would be tragic.
That would be tragic. But it looks like we are all set. All right. So thank you everyone for joining our webinar today, Opportunity to Ownership, Buying and Selling. This webinar is being recorded and we will share that out within the next 24 to 48 hours. So if you want to share it with anyone else or rewatch any parts, it will come straight to your inbox. Please use this chat to engage with us. We love to hear from you. It keeps us presenters going since we can't see your faces. If you have any questions during the webinar, please put those in the Q&A. At the end, I will present those to Matthew so he can answer our diehard questions. And if there's anything Jackrabbit related or that can be answered in the chat by myself or one of the other moderators, we will certainly jump in while Matthew presents. But I want to tell you a little bit about Matthew Becker of Gym Lawyers. So Gym Lawyers PLLC is a legal consulting firm that was founded in 2021 with one goal in mind: to help gym owners manage the legal side of their business so they can focus on what matters most, their client success and their business success. So we have the founder and CEO, Matthew Becker, here today. He is a lawyer turned CrossFit gym owner. So he understands the ins and outs of gym ownership and also the legal implications and risks that come with that. So with his law degree from West Virginia University and more than 10 years of experience in owning his very own gym, Matt's priority is to support other small business owners through the process of buying, selling, opening, or closing a business, developing the documents that you need, and ensuring that you are in good legal standing. Matt's framework for his clients includes education, consulting, and strategy development so he can help owners get from their current legal state to their ideal legal state in a way that works for them. Working with lawyers can be expensive, but that is why our friend Matt is here. Gym Lawyers is structured with a cost per service model. So he is going to talk about the legal side of what you need to know when selling your business or buying an existing one. So I will turn it over to Matthew. Who it's early for him. It's 12 o'clock here on the East Coast, but it's morning for him.
It's not that early, but good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm on the West Coast, so I just turned to 9 a.m. this morning for me. But thank you, Amber, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Matthew Becker. I'm the owner of Gym Lawyers PLLC. Jackrabbit asked me here today to talk about buying and selling, as it is becoming more and more a regular thing that we are seeing across, I'll just say, the fitness industry right now. I would say about 2 years ago, and probably about a year and a half ago, we started seeing a lot of buying and selling taking place in the micro gym functional fitness realm. So if you're thinking personal training studios, Pilates, yoga, CrossFit, there's just been a trend of a lot of buying and selling in that industry. Amber was mentioning yesterday, and we've seen something similar where gymnastics is also seeing this a lot recently. Haven't seen it too much in the cheerleading and dance industry yet. Swim industry has been seeing a lot of buying and selling. We've been seeing a little bit in the mixed martial arts arena. And even a lot of the bigger box gyms, your Orange Fitnesses, your D1 training franchises, there's a lot of buying and selling going on right now as well. So part of what we try to do with gym owners is pretty much help them from the point of starting a gym all the way through this buying and selling and everything that goes along in between. So the lecture that we're going to cover today, once I get it going here, I'm pretty much going to try to talk from the perspective of the buyer or from the seller, and I'll make distinctions about why it's different in between each. One fair warning, and Amber, if you can kind of keep me up to date on this as well. I got notice this morning that the power company is going to cut our power about halfway through this webinar. So I'm running on battery and my phone. So if I freeze for any reason, please hop on and let me know. But I think everything should be good. I apologize for that. It was like panic this morning. Like, come on, guys.
This
But
is what
we should be,
happens when we have live stuff. You never know what's going
yeah,
to happen.
exactly. Okay. All right. So let me get my screen shared here. Oh boy, my screen share. Here we go. All right. And we'll get my,
Perfect.
okay. So the adventures of buying and selling a gym. And the basic question is, are you ready? Are you ready from a seller's perspective? Are you ready from a buyer's perspective? And what does it mean to be ready? Okay. Quick disclaimer, as we always get into this, yes, while I am an attorney, I'm not giving legal advice at the moment. Okay. Nothing in this lecture can be taken as legal advice. And we are not forming any kind of attorney-client privilege because I'm talking to you about the buying and selling process. Everybody's situation is completely different than everybody else's. Everybody is a unique snowflake. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about in generalities that may or may not actually apply to you and your situation. I would recommend that if you have additional questions after this, either contact myself or another attorney to talk about your specific situation. Okay. All right, we're going to break this lecture down into primarily 5 parts. The differences or the different types of buying and selling, preparing to either buy or sell the gym.
Hey, Matthew, just real quick. The screen says loading, but it doesn't look like the slides loaded.
Oh boy. Okay.
Can you maybe X out
Did
of the
any of
center
them
mode and
load?
go back into it?
Sure. Yeah, let me stop sharing
If
here.
that doesn't work, I'll pull them up on my side.
Okay. Am I back? So it's just me again?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me try one more time here. Oh, I see now. Yeah, that is not loading. I see the
Okay.
little screen here.
Not a
I
problem.
wonder
I can
why.
pull them up on my side.
Okay.
All right. Just 1 second.
I'm going to go ahead. Are you, while you're getting that up, Amber, I saw a question from Carrie. Also, if you don't want me to say your name in the question, please say, don't say my name. But Gary asked, I own a large dance school founded in 1958 by my mother. Is there a typical multiple of income when selling a business? Great question. I'm going to talk a little bit about valuation as we go, or at the end. But typically, you're going to look at something around like a 3 to a 3. If you're going to do like an EBITDA valuation, then which is essentially like net income or net profit, adding a few things back in. Your accountant or CPA can give you an EBITDA valuation really fast. And then you would usually look at like a 3 to 3.5 times is typically industry standard. Okay. All right. So we're back here. Are we ready? Can everybody see it now?
We are back in action.
Okay. Do you just want me to say like change next slide? I'll say that whenever I'm ready.
Yeah, just cue me in.
So
Directly.
All right, you can go ahead to the next one. I already gave the disclaimer and then go on to the following. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's try it again. Lecture is going to break down into 5 parts primarily. One is going to be the different types of buying and selling. The second part is going to be preparing to either buy or sell the gym and sort of what steps you need to take to make sure that you're either ready to buy or you're ready to sell. Various roadblocks that you're going to encounter, ultimately getting to closing and what happens post-closing. Go ahead, Amber. All right, part 1, different types of buying and selling. All right, so ideally at the immediate moment, each one of your owners or your managers, you know the owner of the gym, and the gym itself is set up with some kind of a corporate legal entity. There are multiple types of corporate legal entities, but there are 2 primary or most common that we see in the fitness industry, and that is an LLC, a limited liability company, or corporation. Again, there are others. There are partnerships. There's limited partnerships. There are limited liability partnerships. There's sole proprietorships. If you are operating as a sole proprietorship, then one thing I'd like you to take away from this lecture is we really should look at setting up a corporate entity because you're not getting any kind of protection of your personal assets. That's a different lecture, but just note that in the back of your mind. So if we have an LLC or a corporation and we want to sell, option number one is essentially selling everything. So you are selling the business, you are selling all of your stock in your corporation, you're selling all of your interest in your LLC. You are essentially, somebody is coming in and buying everything. The other type is an asset sale. And an asset sale is essentially what it sounds like. You are only buying the assets of that business or that corporation. Okay. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. If you go ahead and Amber and switch. Okay. So if we're coming in and doing it as a stock or an interest sale, and the buyer is coming in and buying all of my business, then they're getting all of the assets and all of the liabilities. So from a buyer's perspective, this may or may not be advantageous, because the big concern that we're worried about in the gym industry is personal injury primary. We have some contract stuff we can worry about as well. Primarily worried about personal injury. Somebody comes into the gym and they get hurt and they sue you for that injury. If that happens, if somebody comes in and gets hurt, most states are going to have somewhere around a 2-year, what's called a statute of limitations for injury. And that'll vary for a little bit from state to state, but generally speaking, let's assume it's 2 years. And what that means is if I come into your gym today and I get injured, I have 2 years from the date that I know I'm injured to bring a lawsuit if I want to against your gym. So we call that a tail of liability. So if you come in tomorrow and you buy my entire business, you're buying the LLC and everything, then you're essentially going to carry that tail of liability for 2 years from the date that you bought it and moving forward. But if somebody hurt themselves 6 months ago and I don't know about it as the owner because they're still treating or whatever, and they have yet to go to an attorney to bring any kind of a lawsuit against me, and I sell you my LLC, you as the buyer now assume that liability that could pop up from the person who had hurt themselves 6 months ago. So from a buyer's perspective, you may not want that tail of liability. From an owner's perspective, or from the seller's perspective, you want to sell that whole LLC because in doing so, you are now removing any liability on yourself going forward. If, however, you just sell the assets and I sell the assets of my LLC, and then that person from 6 months ago comes forward and wants to go after the LLC because that was the owner of the gym at the time that they got injured, my LLC is still going to be liable for that. Okay. And I, as the owner of that LLC, still have to deal with that issue. Okay. So there's pros and cons to buying the whole LLC versus, again, if you go out and you establish your own LLC or your own corporation, you just buy the assets of my gym, you get a completely fresh start. Okay? And you don't have that tail of liability going forward. Now we can flip that, because one of the advantages of buying the whole LLC or the whole corporation is now you have a nice financial history. So if you want to, let's say you want to come in, you want to buy my gym, and then you want to get a small business loan and you want to upgrade it a little bit, give it a little bit of a facelift, get some new equipment, get some build out, whatever it is. Okay. There's an advantage to buying my entire business or my corporation, my LLC, because I have a financial history. If I've been doing a really good job of paying my taxes, paying my bills, I have no debt on the business or anything, then it can be it can look very lucrative and very good to a potential seller, or I'm sorry, a potential lender, versus creating an entirely new entity and only buying my assets. And now you have no financial history, and it could get a little bit harder to get a loan. The final thing to consider is branding. Okay. As part of the assets, there may be branding that can be bought and sold as just an asset sale, but sometimes that branding is linked to the company itself, and may require you to buy the entire company or the entire corporation if you want to be able to continue to use that branding. If there's a lot of what's considered goodwill out there or a lot of brand recognition, it may be advantageous for you to buy everything versus just buying the assets, and the seller may or may not want to exchange that branding. Sometimes sellers also believe that their brand and name recognition is worth a lot of money. And so therefore, if you're coming in as a buyer and you're just trying to buy that trade name, buy that brand, the seller may be increasing the price a lot because you're also getting that name recognition with it. Okay. All right, Amber, let's go ahead on to part 2. Preparing for the buying and selling. All right. So sellers need to get ready. And here are a couple things that you need to get ready before, ideally, before we even put that gym out there as potentially selling. First and foremost is you need to make sure that your corporate documentation is all up to date. When we're talking about corporations, we're talking about things like shareholder agreements, if you have more than one owner, and bylaws, and boards of directors and officers, and making sure that all of the paperwork is in play so that we know that the actual owners, the shareholders, have the ability, have the power, have the legal authority to actually sell either, again, the whole corporation or just the assets. Do those shareholders need to get board approval? Do they need to get a certain amount of votes from the boards? Does it need to go through an officer? Okay, all of this information should be laid out in the corporate documentation. If you don't have that corporate documentation, and you're trying to sell to a buyer who gets a savvy attorney behind them, that could cause a bunch of problems, could cause a bunch of red tape, and could slow down or decrease the value of the business. On the flip side, or I'm sorry, on the other side, if you have an LLC, we need to look at things like operating agreements, partnership agreements, okay? And once again, do we have the corporate documentation in play that gives you, the owner, the actual ability to sell this, okay? And then how do we value it? Sometimes that corporate documentation will determine how do we value the LLC, okay? And there was a question about that a little bit earlier. We're going to need to take a look at your waivers. Comes into really important if we're doing a stock or interest sale. What's your waiver look like? A savvy buyer is going to come in and say, well, if I'm going to buy the entire business, if I'm buying all the LLC, I want to look at that waiver, because if I think the waiver is flimsy, if I don't like the waiver, if I think the waiver leaves the LLC exposed, then I don't want to buy the LLC, because again, we have that tail of liability that's going to follow after I buy everything. And if I think the waiver is weak, then I don't want to buy into a business that I think is potentially exposed because the waiver hasn't been updated in the last 10 years. Similarly, we need to look at the membership agreements. Call these whatever you want: membership agreements, membership contract, payment terms, terms and policies. The bottom line is, it is the agreement that you have with the member, or in some of these instances, the agreement that you have between the parents, if you're dealing with all minors, okay, then the membership agreement is essentially the payment terms, the payment agreement about what's going to happen to their money. Okay, certain states like New York say that if I come in and buy your gym, okay, and you plan on assigning all of the member information, all the credit card information, all the payment processing, everything else over to me as the buyer, then you have to have in writing notice for every one of your clients that says you are allowed to sell me that information, okay? And so we need to have that information in your membership agreement, regardless really of what state you're in, that gives you, the owner, the authority to assign credit card information, super confidential information from you, the current owner, to a buyer or a new owner, okay? And if you don't have that, and the buyer comes in and realizes that, that could significantly reduce the value of your selling business, because you essentially have no guarantee that the buyer is going to come in and get paid by any of the clients next month. We've seen situations where this happens, where the buyer goes in and buys the gym and half the membership leaves because they're not comfortable with their credit card information being moved over to a new buyer. And 9 times out of 10, the sellers try to keep this stuff quiet until like the very last minute because they don't want people to leave. And that can also aggravate members because then all of a sudden the members are loyal to the current owner only to find out that the owner sold to somebody else, never said anything, and transferred all that credit card information over to a new owner. And they're not happy about that. Okay, so we need to have information. We need to have documentation in place, putting the gym on the market that protect that gym as we get toward the closing. Number 4, we need to make sure that the financial books are all up to date. Can you support that valuation? We had the question earlier about what's the multiplier? Well, the multiplier is typically a 3 to 3.5 times, but are the financial books even in order so that we can support what that net value is to even apply that 3 times multiplier? We see a problem a lot of times when one owner is owning multiple different gyms and they try to own all the multiple different gyms under one corporation or one LLC. And they're only selling, oh, wow, okay, I got balloons there. How did I do that? They're only selling the assets of one of the gyms, but they can't demonstrate what the actual value of that gym is because they've commingled the books of every one of the gyms all together. So we then have to spend time really bringing up, getting those financial books in play so that you can actually support the valuation if it's ever asked about. And finally, what is the valuation? I see a couple chat questions popping up about valuation. I'll kind of talk generally about this now, and then we'll check those questions. If I haven't answered the questions in the end, I'll go back and re-answer them. But there's multiple different ways of coming up with valuations. There are valuation calculators online. Probably the most popular resource for determining Google Brain Business or Two Brain Business Gym Valuation Calculator, and it should pop up a blog post that was posted by Two Brain Business. It's a business consulting company that's directed toward micro gyms. Some of you might be familiar with like Next Generation Gym Owners, similar type of service, but they went through and probably put it together the most comprehensive guide of how to value a gym. There's a couple of very common ways to do this. Amber, should we stop for a hand raising as opposed to a chat?
Sure.
Natalie, I don't know what they did to, I don't know. Natalie keeps raising their hand. Let me see if she put anything in the chat.
I haven't seen anything.
Natalie, if you need to raise your hand, throw something in the chat, please, and Amber, keep watch of it. I don't know if that's something that she wants us to address immediately, or if I can just keep going, but for now, I'll just keep going. So the most common ways to value a business are one of two. Okay, one way is to go out and hire an accountant, a CPA, an economist, in order to take a look at the books. They do like a 5-year research on the books, and it costs you about $3,000 to $5,000 that they will come back with a valuation that you can essentially take to the bank. Okay, and that's the sort of like the most comprehensive way. There's advantages to doing that. So as a seller, if you use a company that is familiar with valuing gyms, they exist out there. The most popular one would be Rig Equipment, RIG Equipment. They do these valuations, and they can frame the valuation so that it looks most advantageous to the seller. Somebody else in the comments just said third level consulting. Yes, they also do a lot of valuations for gym owners. The other most common way I mentioned earlier is what's called EBITDA, EBITDA. DTATDA. Anyway, it's an accounting evaluation that is essentially net income, net profit, net owner benefit, if you're familiar with that term. Add in a couple of things back in, like some taxes and depreciation, and then you multiply that by 3 or 3.5. So let's just say for a second that your net owner benefit in the gym, your net profit is $2,000 a month. Okay, that would be $12,000 or $24,000 a year. Multiply that by 3, and that's going to be a very rough valuation of your gym. But anybody who's been keeping up with an accountant throughout the year's CPA should be able to give you an EBITDA valuation of your gym very quickly. All right, Amber, let's move on to the buyers. All right, buyers, what you guys need to do in order to get ready? You need an attorney. 9 times out of 10, it is the buyer's responsibility to create the purchase paperwork, which we'll talk about in a moment. I do not recommend that you try to do this on your own. I do not recommend that you try to do this on ChatGPT because you are likely going to mess it up. And your common examples would be you end up as the buyer presenting stock purchase paperwork when you're only trying to do an asset purchase. Okay. We need to make sure that we're doing lien searches and other things on equipment to make sure that there's nothing there clouding the sale. There are just multiple reasons that just get an attorney involved on this. Once you do that, you need to set up your own corporate entity. Especially if you're going to just buy the assets, you need your own LLC or corporation. But even on top of that, even if you're doing a stock sale or an interest sale, there are advantages to creating your own corporate entity as an extra layer of protection. And that's just something that, again, you need to go through the pros and cons with an attorney who is familiar with buying and selling so that they can tell you what are the advantages of creating a corporate entity in order to buy a corporate entity. As I mentioned there, number 3, usually the buyer pays for the preparation of the documentation. You need to start looking into funding. How are you going to get the money? How do you have access to a line of credit? Do you have good financial history that you can get a loan? Okay, how are you going to get this money? Or do we need to start considering what's called seller financing? Seller financing, perhaps is just sort of a fancy sounding way of basically saying that you're coming in and buying my gym. Let's say I'm selling my gym for $100,000. You can only come up with $50,000. So I agree to take $50,000 up front and then allow you to make some sort of monthly installment payments over the next 36, 60 months, whatever it is. So it's kind of like a loan, kind of like repayment. It's a monthly installment payment idea, but it's referred in the industry as seller financing. Okay. The last item here is the letter of intent. The letter of intent is sort of the kickoff to the whole buying and selling process. So I, the buyer, I come to you as the selling gym. We have some base conversations about, are we going to make it a stock sale? Are we going to make it an asset sale? What's the price? What am I getting? What are the conditions? Is there a commercial lease involved, et cetera? And we kind of come to this verbal agreement. At that point, it is the buyer's job. Usually, again, we could do this from the seller's side, but usually it's now the buyer's job to put all of this down in writing and send it as a letter of intent. And that's the formal kickoff in writing to the seller to say, I'm the buyer. I would like to intend to buy your business or intend to buy the assets of your business. Here are all of the conditions that I think we need to meet from this point to closing. Would you like to enter into negotiations with me? If the seller does, the seller signs the letter of intent and it's off and running. Okay, go ahead, Amber. Thank you. All right, roadblocks, things that can stop the landlord. There it is. The number one way to stop the buying and selling process is the landlord puts their foot down. This is also the number one thing that gym owners forget to double check anytime they're trying to buy and sell. So if you pull out your commercial lease, okay, there's most likely something in your commercial lease, if you lease, that says if somebody else is going to come in, if a buyer is going to come in and take over, if you're going to assign the lease, if you're going to sublease, Okay, whatever it is, you have to get landlord permission to do this. And if we wait until the moment of closing and then turn around and tell the landlord that we need to get the original owner off, get them out of their personal guarantee and move somebody else into this commercial property, the landlord could say no, and it's going to shut the entire thing down. Let's go on to the next one, please, Amber. All right. So, as I said, number one overlooked issue in buying and selling is notifying the landlord. Okay, we need to notify the landlord ASAP. And this is usually the buyer's responsibility, I'm sorry, the seller's responsibility. So the seller calls me up and says, hey, I'm looking to sell my gym. What do we need to do? We talk about a lot of this stuff. We talk about the phases of selling the gym. And then I say, and once we're done with our phone call your landlord and tell them that you are going to sell. Okay, because the lease most likely requires landlord consent. And landlords traditionally drag their feet on this stuff. Okay, so we need to get them involved as soon as possible. I'm handling a matter right now where the gym owners are trying to close by June 1. And as of yesterday, we're still waiting for the landlords to do their part so that we can move the lease into the buyer's name. Buying and selling, they're pushing it. They're trying to get all this paperwork done. They're trying to get this thing done because they're nervous that it's not going to happen in the next 9 days. And we can do nothing without the landlord's consent. Amber, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, two common lease transfers. There's other names to these. There's other ways to do this, but the two most common that we are going to see is either an assignment or a new lease. Okay, an assignment is, let's say, again, I'm the selling gym and I'm in a lease, and the lease has a 5-year term, and I'm selling 3 years into the 5-year term. Well, there's 2 years left on this lease. The lease is a binding legal contract. If I'm getting out of this lease as the selling gym owner, I have to try to break that contract. The landlord might not be comfortable with that because the landlord might say, well, look, I've had a prior relationship with you, Matt, and you've been paying your monthly rent every month without default, whatever. I like you. You don't cause me any problems. But now 3 years into a 5-year lease, you want me to go and form a relationship with somebody completely new that I don't know at all. And I'm not comfortable doing that. So as the landlord, I'll bring in this new buyer. Okay, I'll agree to them. I'll let them in on the contract. I'll let them in on the lease. But Matt, as the seller, you're going to maintain liability as well for the remainder of those 2 years. That's an assignment. Okay, the lease is being assigned to the new buyer, the new gym owner, perhaps the new LLC, the new corporation, whatever. But the original tenant, the original personal guarantor, if there was one on the lease, maintains liability through the period of the remainder of the lease. There are ways that we can negotiate, either if we're repping the buyer or the seller, that assignment to help be a little bit more advantageous. But from a buyer's perspective, it's not advantageous to have an assignment because they maintain liability. If the buyer comes in, I may have said that backwards. The seller is not advantageous for the assignment because if the buyer comes in and tanks the gym, the seller is then going to be pulled in to say, look, your buyer isn't making their rent payments. So seller, you got to kick back in here and start making the rent payments. From a buyer's perspective, however, an assignment is advantageous because if there are favorable lease conditions and the buyer wants to maintain those favorable lease conditions, then the assignment allows them to do that for the remainder of that current lease term. We saw this a lot coming out of COVID, where markets were going up and up and up, and rents were going up and up and up, and CAM fees over the last year have been skyrocketing. And the sellers who have come in with 5-year, 7-year, 10-year terms, and they're pretty much locked in below fair market value, it's very advantageous for a buyer to come in and get assigned in on that lease because that buyer then gets to enjoy that below fair market value base rent for the continuation in the remainder of that term. Okay, so again, depending on what side we're on, there are pros and cons to an assignment as opposed to a brand new lease. Some landlords come in and they go, okay, cool. You want to bring in a buyer? That's fine. We're just going to break the lease with you because Fair market value has gone up, and I, the landlord, want an opportunity to renegotiate this lease with the new person. Great, thanks, seller. You just gave me an opportunity to break this terrible lease with you and re-enter it with somebody else. Great for the seller, because the seller gets out. There's no assignment. Seller has no liability whatsoever. They're not going to be pulled back in the event that there's a default on the lease. Bad for the buyer, because the buyer now has to completely renegotiate a whole new lease. And if the landlord learned their lesson on something, the buyer may have an issue with that. For example, noise. If your gym is one that causes quite a bit of noise, okay, and the seller wasn't, or the landlord wasn't aware of that when they originally entered into the lease agreement with you, but now they're aware of that and they all of a sudden want to start putting a bunch of noise ordinances in the lease, that can be at a disadvantageous to the buyer. Okay, next slide, please. All right, part 4, the closing. Go ahead. Thank you. So, buyer and seller, you guys have had verbal conversations. You've decided, seller, you're going to sell the gym, buyer, you're going to buy the gym. Buyer has gone, hired an attorney. Seller has gone, hired their attorney, and the buyer sends a formal letter of intent. Seller signs it. You guys enter into negotiations. You put lease conditions in there and other things, that all these boxes that need to be checked in order to actually close the sale. So now we're assuming the buyer has gotten into some sort of a lease agreement and we're ready to close. Okay. Closing is sort of like I think it's a little bit more formal than it needs to be. 9 times out of 10 in the gym industry or the fitness industry, it just basically means we're signing all of the official legal buy-sell documentation and we're exchanging money. Okay. There are some times where we may sign the purchase paperwork and then we have to wait a period of time before we officially close, but that's usually not the case in the fitness industry. Okay, or at least not in these sort of smaller purchases. I've seen larger ones with franchises where we do see that more often, but usually on your smaller solo owners or owner operators, it's the closing is essentially the signing of the purchase paperwork. All right, so a couple of different types of documents that we want to see at closing. One is a non-compete. FTC recently came out and said they're trying to wipe out non-competes altogether in employment contracts. However, they specifically said you can still use non-competes in buying and selling. So buyers, as a way of protecting your interest, you want a nice non-compete that says the seller can't go out and take all the proceeds of the money that you just gave them in buying their gym and open up a competitor, 5 miles down the road. All right, protect the purchase. Second one is going to be your stock purchase agreement, interest purchase agreement, asset purchase agreement. This is the legal document, depending on the type of buy sell we're doing here. This is essentially the legal document that says we are actually selling everything or we are actually buying everything. Okay, that's the big one. If we're doing assets, we need to do a bill of sale for each one of those assets. We have to assign title. We have to assign right title and interest if we're selling the whole LLC. Okay, so we need stuff like assignments. And then if we're doing some sort of seller financing, I mentioned earlier, then we're going to look at promissory notes. Promissory notes are, again, essentially the lending agreement in which we agree that I, as the seller, I'm taking a lump sum up front and I'm agreeing to allow you to give installment payments over a period of time. And then what other parameters are involved in those installment payments? Okay, do you have the ability to pay off early? What's the interest rate? What's the payment consistency? Is it every month on the 1st, every month on the 5th? Are there lump sum payments that come into play every 6 months in order to get payoffs faster? What happens if you default? Okay. If we're buying and selling the actual stock of the corporation or the actual interest in the LLC, then there are additional things we need to add to the promissory note in order to protect the seller in the event of a default. But these are the most common documents that you would see come up at closing that we've already negotiated between the point of the letter of intent and these closing documents. But these are the official closing documents that are common in a buying selling of a fitness gym. All right, Amber, we can move on. Part number 5, what do we have to do now after closing? Go ahead. Seller, after closing, you're pretty much done. All right. If you have maintained ownership of your corporation or your LLC and you don't plan on doing anything else with it, we should have a conversation about dissolving it. For the most part, once we post closing, and either has their money or is getting their installment payments, you're pretty much done. There's exceptions to everything that I say, but post-closing usually focuses more on the buyer. So what do we have to do? Buyers, you aren't done. We've now bought either an entire LLC or we've bought an entire or all of the assets of an LLC. And if we've bought all of the stock, or we've bought the whole corporation or the whole LLC, we got to get online to the Secretary of State or the Department of State, whatever your state calls it, and we need to update that corporate filing. So if you go on your Secretary of State or Department of State website right now and you do a search for your corporation or your LLC, it should all be updated to show that you are the current owner, who's the registered agent, who are the other officers. But it all applies to you, the current gym owner. When somebody comes in and buys all of that, they need to go on and update all of that corporate filing. Next, buyers, you need to file doing business as, assumes names, DBAs, service names, trade names, fictitious business names. Again, whatever your state calls it. If your corporate name is different from the branded name of your gym, we need to tell the world that they're one and the same. And there's a process to do that. Okay, whether that's done on the state, done on the county, done on the city. Every state has their own individual process. We just have to go through. And from a buyer's perspective, if you just paid money in order to use to get to use the gym's name, you did an asset sale. You set up your own corporate entity. You bought all the assets of my gym, including my branding, because there's name recognition there. Then you want to make sure you protect that. You want to make sure that we go through that filing process to connect that trade name now to your LLC, so the world knows this trade name, this cool brand recognized name, is now associated with your LLC, your corporation, your legal entity. Okay. And there are a couple of other legal protection reasons why we need to go through that. But for these purposes, you bought it, you want to use it, so connect it to your corporation so that you can. And then ultimately, we need to update all of the internal documentation. So if you bought the corporation, if you bought the LLC, then we need to update the waiver because likely the person selling the gym hasn't updated the waiver in the last 5, 10, 15 years. A lot has changed in the last 5 years as far as liability is concerned. So we need to add information into that waiver. We need to update the membership agreement. You may not like the way that the previous owner was selling memberships. And they got all these contracts with their current clients or with the clients and ways that you don't like. So we need to update all of that to be under you and your terms. And now, again, if you created the LLC and you went in and bought the assets, all these members need to re-sign an agreement agreeing to pay your LLC and not the seller's LLC. And then finally, updating staff agreements, whether we're talking in employees, independent contractors. If the gym owner, the previous gym owner, has been doing this for 15, 20 years, they probably don't even have written agreements with their staff. And nowadays that causes some big problems. So we need to get those staff agreements. We either need to create them, we need to update them, we need to put your terms in there, whatever it is. We need to make sure that we are creating staff agreements for you and your gym. Okay, moving on. And that is pretty much the process. Look at my beautiful thank you there. That's pretty much the process from a very broad strokes. Did that in about 40 minutes. There's probably quite a few questions that came out of that, and I'm happy to just go through and try to answer all of them. We've got 15 minutes, or I can hang on a little bit longer. But that last slide there, hammer down fast, has all of my contact information, where the best ways of getting a hold of me. It's okay, Amber, I can repeat it all. But you're muted. Oh, I can't hear you at least.
Here we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I was putting this up here just so that
oh, there we are.
Yeah,
there's my
we've got
information.
everything up there for you. Some people here are friends of Jackrabbit. Some people here are Jackrabbit clients. So that way you know how to get in touch with either side. But we do have some questions. So there are a
Yeah,
couple in the
yeah. Let's go
chat,
through a
and
lot
then
of these
there's one in the
questions.
Q&A too as well.
Okay, let's grab the Q&A because that's just one, and then we can go over to the chat.
All right. So Michael said, if I own my building, he's the
Mhm.
landlord, how likely is it that a buyer will want to purchase the building in addition to the gym business?
Yeah. I don't know that I can say it's super likely or unlikely. I think it's going to go on a case by case basis, depending on how much money the buyer has to come in. I mean, once again, we've done this on both sides where the buyer comes in and only buys the gym and then enters into a lease agreement with the owner. We've had instances where the owners don't want to sell the buildings because it's additional income. We've had instances where the sellers want to sell the buildings, and that limits their pool of buyers because now the buyer has to come in and be able to afford the building along with the gym business. If they have a really booming gym business that's worth $300,000 and they got a building that's worth $600,000, that's going to limit the number of buyers who can come in and buy it. A third option on this would be to only sell the gym and then enter into some sort of long-term lease to own agreement with the new gym buyer, so that over time they can get a hold of that building.
Makes sense. I believe Michael was at Next Gen Gym Owners last summer, so hopefully we'll see him there again.
Yes. Yes,
We've
that's
got
why I
another,
smiled when I saw Michael Hayes'
yeah,
question. I know
yeah.
Michael well. Okay.
Another question was, does the multiplier increase with the increased EBITDA? If I said that right.
Yeah, you did. And generally it's the multiplier, it can go up, not necessarily as the value as the EBITDA goes up, but really as the seller thinks their gym is worth more. The gym industry it's difficult to value because for all intents and purposes, the actual valuation with the membership can vary month to month, 6 months. It's hard to come up with a projected valuation, which is why we usually say a 3 to 3.5 multiplier. Because if the gym is doing really well and it has super good brand recognition, then the seller can oftentimes justify a 3.5 multiplier. If the gym does not have that much brand recognition, like my gym in Pittsburgh, I'm like one of 15 in the greater Pittsburgh area, it's going to be hard for me to justify a 3.5 just because there's so much competition that it may not be actually worth as much of as a 3.5 multiplier.
All right. They keep coming in, so this is perfect.
I know. We're gonna have to maybe go to the chat too. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one here on the Q&A.
Yeah. So Annalise said, any advice if you are wanting to set up a relationship with a current employee to have them purchase your business down the road? It's a good one.
Yeah. At least there's a number of options there. One that I'm almost going to just say, reach out to me because I can spend another 45 minutes talking about how to set up something like that. I mean, we can talk about non-equity partnership agreements. We can talk about partnership agreements that are sort of waterfall graduating into more and more interest in the company over time. There's all kinds of different ways we can set up some instance there where you have an employee who you're trying to groom to be an owner at some point. It may just be we need to have that conversation with the employee. There's sort of like similar kind of not rent to own, but kind of like rent to own situations where, again, they just sort of get more and more ownership. They get more and more management responsibilities of the gym over time. And we just need to put all of that in writing so that we know that at some point there's a triggering date where it actually gets sold. We'll see a lot of instances here as well where the gym owner will do it now. They'll sell now, but they'll sell with a long-term seller financing so that the employee has a long period of time to pay this thing off. And the owner, the current seller, kind of always has the option to go back in and take over if the employee or the buyer starts to kind of tank the gym a little bit.
Very good. All right. So we've got an attendee who is currently in the process of purchasing their first gym, which is super exciting.
Congratulations. Yep.
Yeah, big congratulations there. They are in the LOI stage. So what should they proactively be doing before closing to make sure they don't overwhelm themselves or new employees?
Okay. I will just plug this again. If you don't have somebody currently helping you, get somebody, whether it's us, whether it's somebody local, get somebody helping you. Because as a buyer and as a first-time buyer, again, you're responsible more or less for the production of the documentation. And there are ways that this documentation can be written in order to help you, whether you're doing an asset or stock or an interest purchase. LOI, just in case people didn't pick up, is short for letter of intent. From a buyer's perspective, usually if a seller presents an LOI, they're going to do it in a non-binding fashion. So non-binding fashion essentially means that at any time, the buyer or the seller, the buyer, they can walk away. The seller can consider other buying offers. Okay, so if this current seller, if this person watching, let's say you're buying the gym for $100,000, and you've used some sort of run-of-the-mill non-binding letter of intent, okay, then somebody else comes along and offers $110,000. There's nothing really stopping that seller from coming in and just saying, thanks, but I'm going to take this offer over here. Okay. So again, a lot of things to be considered, a lot beyond just sort of what we were able to cover in broad strokes today. We need to talk about leases, and is it going to be an assignment versus are they going to do a new lease with you? Do you want to non-compete? Okay, but there are strategies that can be put in place now to help protect what you're investing in the future. But I don't have a whole lot of other information from you, so it's hard for me to go into any more detail than that.
Sure thing. If you guys want Matthew to answer any specific questions about your specific use case, feel free to reach out to him. He is, as you can see, a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this stuff. So Chris actually has two questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to ask them at the same time. They're both about the EBITDA. So is that based on gross annual sales or net profit? And is it calculated on average over a period of years?
So it's usually based on net because gross doesn't really give an adequate valuation to a buyer coming in to know exactly how much it's worth. Okay, again, another example for my own gym. No risk of sharing too much. I don't make a whole lot from my gym because I don't live in Pittsburgh anymore. As you may have picked up, I live on the West Coast. I don't work in my gym. I pay 2 full-time coaches and I have 3 part-time coaches who pretty much suck up all profit whatsoever. So if I were ever to go and sell my gym, I can show that I have this really great gross revenue every month. But in the end, if you look at my books, I, as the owner, don't actually make a whole lot because I have so much staff that takes up all of that what would be my net profit if I was there as an owner or daily operator. Okay, so you can try it off of gross, but anybody who comes in and looks at your books is going to realize that the valuation needs to be based off of net. The second part of the question there, that's more of a question that gets a little bit into more of the accounting question. But usually in gym sales in the fitness industry, we want to look at a trend over the last 3 years.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. This is a really good one. Where do I find a buyer if I want to sell?
Facebook. No, I'm kidding. That is one option. Again, this one's tricky, okay, because there's a balancing act from the seller's perspective of wanting to get it out there, but also you don't want to freak people out. So you want to get it out there on the market. You want people to know that you're trying to sell your gym, but you don't really want your clients to pick up on that because the clients may get scared and start to think, whoa, what's going to happen to the gym when you sell? Usually there's kind of like a hierarchy to this for ease of trying to sell. The top is usually an employee or staff member who has expressed some sort of interest, like we had the other question there, who has expressed some sort of interest in buying. Okay. Or if you have trusted staff, you can go to them and start the conversation of, I would like to sell in the next 12 to 24 months. Would you have an interest in figuring out how to buy if I'm interested in selling? The next step down would be clients. If you have super loyal clients, somebody who's been there 10, 15 years, somebody who just loves the gym, somebody who's always looking to make an investment, something like that, approach those people, take them out for coffee. We can do non-disclosure agreements for you, which we do recommend for sellers who are shopping around, that you get even buyers coming in who are now going to look at your books. Signing of the letter of intent from a seller's perspective, we're going to want them to sign a non-disclosure agreement to protect you and what you're trying to do, all of your financial information, everything else. Once we've kind of crossed clients off of the list, if you have any friends in the industry, if you're part of a group like Next Generation Gym Owners, or there's one for dance. I can't remember what it was. I'm drawing a blank on the dance one.
There's so many.
Yeah, but groups, Facebook groups with gym owners, consulting groups in which you have access to gym owners, you have access to other entrepreneurs who may be interested in buying and selling. And then, ultimately there are listing sites out there. Again, you'd have to get a hold of me directly for me to get you the name of the listing site. I've had clients in the past to put their gyms on these listing sites. And then people who are interested in buying businesses, they're just business general listing sites. People who are interested in buying businesses can go on, find your gym, contact you. And if anybody's ever tried to sell anything on like Facebook Marketplace, it's kind of like a similar process in which out of the 10,000 inquiries you're going to get, like 5 of them are going to be legit. And it's just the pain in the butt of weeding through and trying to find the people who are actually interested. So that's usually sort of the step process of selling. Again, I don't promote Two Brain Business because I didn't any kickback. I promote Two Brain Business because in the industry where I'm from, in the CrossFit realm, they're the leading business consultants. I've had the most exposure to them. They have a guide out there. Again, if you Google Two Brain Business selling my gym, there's an ebook out there that will explain sort of the best practices for selling a gym as well. Okay.
Sure.
And again, no shade to any of the other companies. Love them, love Next Generation Gym Owners. I just know these resources exist from Two Brain Business.
Absolutely. We've also got some friends on here from Third Level Consulting.
Yes.
They are very familiar with all youth activities and
Yes.
how they can help with these scenarios. So
yeah, another great resource. Yeah. Yep.
Let's take one more. Marina just bought a dance studio. Congratulations. She grew up there and was a teacher there for the last 5 years. And she's entering her first year as a business owner. So do you have any suggestions or tips and tricks for her first year?
Sorry, did she say she bought in or she
she bought
up?
So she grew up there and she taught there and now she is the new owner.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So again, first off, it's always a congratulations anytime anybody buys something like this, enters into business. It's super exciting. I was super nervous when I did it 11 years ago, and you never look back once you get so many years in. But with that said, probably the best thing for you to do from a business side is get some sort of mentoring group, some sort of consulting group. If you're not already a part of one, there's usually some sort of like pretty steep buy-in, but you don't know what you don't know, and they're designed to teach you what you don't know. And 9 times out of 10, like I even operated my gym for 7 years before I joined a consulting group. And what I did in the last 4 years was exponential growth versus what I was able to do in the first 7 years because I didn't have a consulting group behind me. From the legal perspective, you need to get in front of an attorney to basically perform a legal audit. And that's a service that we offer, that we're basically going to start with the corporate entity that you either used to buy in or that you bought. We're going to audit that. We're going to make sure it's all updated, make sure that the 4 steps of creating a legal entity, the actual filing of the legal entity, the business bank account, the DBA, and the corporate governing documentation is all up to speed. We'll pull and audit your liability waivers, your membership agreements, your staff agreements, make sure that those things are all up to date, make sure that you're not missing any state filings or anything like that. A lot of gym owners are missing the BOIR requirement, the new federal requirement from the Financial Crimes Division, requirements for filing your business ownership information. So just, again, getting these other professionals that are out in the field, third level, other consulting agencies, gym lawyers, getting all of us to just sort of look at what you're doing. A lot of times these audits can be done for free, and then we'll charge you to fix it. But, just realizing what's wrong is sort of the first step.
Absolutely. I think the theme here is don't try to do it alone. Use the people that are experts, and they will get you on the right path. So we are after the hour. It's been a long time since we've had so many questions and such good content that we've kept going. So I do want to reiterate, please reach out to Matthew if you have any specific questions. His website and email address is listed there. The recording will go out within the next 24 to 48 hours. So look for that in your inbox. Feel free to share it if you like. If you are a Jackrabbit client and you need to pull any kind of reports to help with your valuation of your business, if you're thinking of any of these things, we know this is a hot topic, so please reach out to us and we can help you as well from the class management software side. If you already have class management, they should be able to help you as well. But if you're interested in Jackrabbit, obviously you can reach out to us. We would love to talk to you as well. But I will let everyone get back to their day. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Matthew, for presenting this content. It's really, really been top of mind for a lot of people. So the timing was
my
perfect.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining and sitting through. It's always a pleasure to talk about it.
Yeah. All right, everybody, have a great one.